You're watching SABC News. Well, for more on the alleged engagement of the state security services at the national broadcaster to manage leaks of confidential information, as reported in a major weekly newspaper, the SABC has since rejected what they call misrepresentations by the Sunday Times in its article headed SABC to get spooks to spy on its staff. We're now joined in studio by William Bird from Media Monitoring Africa. Good afternoon, William. Always a pleasure to see you on the SABC News Desk.
Good to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
William, more ructions at the SABC we wake up to today. I just want to garner your initial reactions to a development like this one we see playing out.
Well, I mean, obviously the way in which it's being framed in the Sunday Times is very, very worrying.
Indeed.
Particularly because of SABC's very recent past, where we know that there were, allegations of direct interference and involvement, in fact, by a state security agency. We've seen all sorts of allegations around them being potentially involved around the SABC 8. And so when a story like this then breaks, when we've got, a new board that is trying to bring stability to things at the SABC, it's a very, very worrying story to see.
And it's even more worrying, I think, that when men and women who are allowed to be engaged in activities of the state that can be justified in theory as part of the role of the state. And you can have indeed all sorts of consequences, even the subversion of freedom of expression and democracy itself.
So look, I think that we need to be cautious about suggesting that we believe that this story is necessarily accurate. Because to date we've had no indication that there's been any level of editorial interference from the board, or in fact senior executive level, in the way that the SABC is run. We haven't heard any alleged interference by the minister or people outside of the SABC. Those things seem to have been, thankfully, put back behind us. And that's a very strong indicator of credibility. We also need to say, we know because we engaged with the SABC board, the interim board, at the time that the allegations were there that said they wanted all staff, including journalists and editors, to be vetted by the SSA. And of course, any board member that gets appointed, they get vetted by the state security agency. That's part of the parliamentary process. And as I understand it, that also applies to your senior executive team. Now that's understandable because that happens to all public, state-owned enterprises. But the moment you take that down to journalists, that would be fundamentally unacceptable. Now, I don't believe that if having engaged with Mary Papaya professionally for the last decade or so, that she would on any level countenance any idea that you should be tracking what journalists are doing. I don't believe that.
Just on that point, tell us why it's crucial that no journalist in the country ever be subjected to any kind of state security agency processes at all.
Well, I mean, you can't say never. If they have to register for a conference, they have to go through standard procedures as any of us do if we attend anything, right? But certainly as part of the employment of the SABC, there's no way that you should be inviting the SSA to be making vetting of SABC journalists, anything that should be anything to do with their job. I would be astonished if this was something that was supported by the board. I would really, I struggle to believe that. So if that's in the minutes, then I think that the Sunday Times needs to make those minutes available. Alternatively, the board, I think, should make that portion of the minutes available for all members of the public to scrutinize and see that this was or wasn't in fact the case. As I said, I would be astonished by that.
All right, there's still many questions hanging over this story, but what are some of the implications for the national broadcaster right now, who is at this moment over the past 2 years ago, trying 2 years or so, trying hard to work to rebuild on its credibility and integrity as a news provider in the country?
And I think that they've done really well. Certainly our monitoring around elections has showed just how well the SABC performed in our recent election period compared to 2016, where there was clear evidence of bias. And now we're seeing a fundamentally different operation, which is why, as I said, for this to be now, if there were all these rumors, and if you were, for example, not even allowed to invite me into the studio, as was the case beforehand, or if you'd only speak to me in the car park now, whereas everyone here is free to speak about whatever they want to. If that was a different climate, then I might be more inclined to believe that this is a board that's bringing in the SSA to look at journalists. But that certainly isn't the case. In other words, this goes against everything that we've seen of the SABC over the last 2 years, certainly the way they're prepared to take on the minister, on anybody or any party that challenges their independence. So it really does seem an extraordinary thing to suggest that they would be speaking to the SSA about saying, please vet our journalists.
Behind employees' backs. Tell me, William, unions, of course, and some civil rights groups understandably irate at this point, likening what's happening here, or what's allegedly happening, to apartheid-style tactics, to silence whistleblowers, etc. A justified comparison, do you think? I mean, taken into account that last month we just marked 42 years since Black Wednesday and the strides we've made as a nation toward entrenching media freedom.
Well, exactly, and I think that the SABC has demonstrated, certainly over the last 2 years,
and
just
consistently
so, how they're not prepared to tolerate levels of editorial interference any longer. That seems to be a fairly significant running theme, and I've yet to hear if there are journalists that think otherwise. Then they need to blow the whistle on that, right? But that is whistleblowing, as opposed to suggesting that the SABC board have now taken some kind of decision that they are going to be inviting the SSA to vet their journalists. From the story, it said that they had received a legal opinion that said that that would not be acceptable, and as I understand, I wouldn't see why they would not choose to follow that legal opinion. Certainly, we know that they supported the position and the submissions with regard to precisely this issue when we made submissions on the Critical Infrastructure Bill, which is the bill that deals precisely with these kinds of issues, that says journalists shouldn't be subjected to any kind of vetting.
Just on the point of that bill, what is the status of that bill? Because you were calling for 2 amendments, if I remember correctly.
That is correct.
Yes.
As far as I know, it's before the NCOP, but I stand to be corrected.
And what were the points of contention?
So they were about precisely this idea that said that, because it wasn't clear, and we wanted to build in that exception that would say journalists are not subject to this, precisely because whether it's here or at any other enterprise, but largely the SABC, you cannot subject them to this for a range of reasons that would fundamentally undermine media freedom. Now, because as we've said, the SABC's recent history and their commitment to independence, this really does seem to jar against that, But again, I think the only way we're going to move forward is, I think that the SABC board need to be going and taking the Sunday Times to the press council if they feel that aggrieved by this, and it seems clearly from what the chair was saying earlier that they are feeling that deeply aggrieved. And I think that if necessary, they make that portion of the minutes publicly available so that we can see for ourselves what was said.
William Bird from Media Monitoring Africa joining us on the desk this afternoon. Always a pleasure having you with us at the SABC.